laterally by virtue of these pipes. So we're going to choose our spot where we want the float to go, and then set up the pair of pipes about 24 to 30 inches separation between the two pipes, and stand them up, and kind of, you can actually just sort of like plumb bob them so that they kind of hang vertically, and then we're just going to push them down into this soft mud bottom, which is pretty typical. About so, and then also provided are these heavy deck screws, and I'm going to take a pair of these deck screws. All right. Yep. Get that started. I'm just going to sort of eyeball this to see that it's plumb. So we've got the float without oysters, but ready to go in the water. So we're just going to set it overboard and take it from there. So, okay, got the float in the water, and what we want is to orient the float so that the weight, which is this device that's filled with sand, we want that so that it's towards the pier and the two pilings. So that's the proper orientation there. And now we're going to add the oysters. So we'll put 3 bags of oysters in each one of these. Alright, so here are the bags. These are just a thin kind of a nylon mesh, almost like you might find oranges or grapefruit in the grocery store. And in here are lots of oyster shells. And on these oyster shells are the spat in question. So I don't know how well you're going to be able to get this. The spat are still awfully small at this stage. They're right at my fingertip. That little spot there is one. There's a little spot right there. That's one. There's like 3 little spots right there that I kind of cleaning up with my fingertip. Oops, I just knocked one loose. So, but those are all little tiny spat. So these are about 10 days old right now. But we're going to take these 3 bags and put it into the float. So the door panel I've already got open, and I'm going to take one of these bags, which weighs about 25 pounds. So it's got a little weight to it, but it's not terrible. And I'm just going to kind of drop this bag down in here. And it's important to wear gloves so that you don't cut yourself, because sometimes the edges of the shell can be kind of sharp. But this mesh, and this one's already got a kind of a rip in it, which is nice, but the mesh is pretty weak. It's kind of strong enough to hold this shell together. So you just take your fingers, kind of tear a hole through the bag, and then dump the shell into the float through the door. I'll take the second one. hole started there. That's 2 bags. Here's the 3rd bag. Okay, so that was probably about 3,000 spat, about 1,000 per bag that we've now got inside of the float. And at this point, we want to close the float up. So if there's any line, like this line, which we're going to get to in a minute, hanging in there, then it's time to remove it. And then I'm going to close this door panel. So, and actually, Bob, I don't know if you can get close. Or maybe we might be able to do this like back on land too, where you can get tight. And I can show the use of these clips. But the idea is to use this clip to grab both the threshold of the opening and the door panel. I think we're going to have to like shoot that kind of up close so people can see, because it is like a little bit tricky, but I mean it's not hard once you see how it's done. It'll probably require some detail work. Okay. There's a reach that I don't quite like. So now we're going to switch sides, and we're going to secure the float to the collars, and this, what I call the tide turner line, we're going to secure that to the pier itself, but we're going to do it from the opposite side so it's not such a big reach to reach across and do all these things. So for the moment, I'm just going to kind of flip that over, and then we're going to move the boat around to the opposite side and finish the installation from that side. We're going to secure the float itself to these collars that go around the PVC pilings, as I like to call them. And I'm using these bungee ball ties, although I have a feeling that I'm going to switch over to real heavy cable ties. So when we're actually doing this installation, I think we're going to use the cable ties. Some people call them zip ties, you know, the plastic ratcheting ties. But the idea here is the same no matter what the fastener is. We're going to pass the fastener through this collar, down around the inside of the PVC float, and try and get a hold of it as I pass it through this collar. So there we are. So now the float is secured to these pilings. And then the last step is we're going to take this line, and the other end of this line is attached to that little weighted, what I call the clock weight. That's how I refer to that. We're going to take this line and we're going to put a screw through it, and we're going to screw it to the pier itself, to the structure of the pier. So I'm just going to come up here. Screw that thing on just like that. The very final step is to activate the tide turner mechanism. So this line, it was attached to this, the clock weight, which is filled with sand at the other end of that line. When I release that clock weight overboard, this line is just going to be sort of hanging straight down. It makes one wrap around the drum, and the clock weight is suspended down in the water column. It's hanging underneath. But that's the mechanism that actually it turns the drum as the float rises and falls with the tide. So to activate the tide turner mechanism, all I got to do is deploy the clock weight. So I'm going to reach out and unfasten this bungee that was holding the clock weight onto the cylinder, which is just for packaging basically. And I'm going to take this clock weight and just release it overboard. So at this point, there's a little bit of tension in the line provided by the clock weight. And as the float rises and falls with the tide, it's this action that causes the drum to turn. And basically that's what relieves us of maintenance and having to come out here and clean the float, because the part of the drum which is exposed to the air is drying out. So these organisms like barnacles and such, they're going to try and potentially colonize our drum and maybe block the flow of water to our oysters. They're constantly coming out of the water and they're drying out and they're dying, so the drum stays nice and clean and the water flows to the oysters and the oysters do really well. So that completes the installation right there.